The midday heat hung over the small Texas town like a heavy blanket, mixing with the humidity and dust to create a suffocating haze. On Main Street, long and straight like an invisible line, a shiny black SUV appeared in the distance. The sun reflected off its perfectly polished surface, creating a mirage-like effect as if it floated above the scorching asphalt. Officer Darren Smith sat in his patrol car, lazily sipping cold coffee from a plastic cup. It had been a dull day, no accidents, no violations, just heat and silence. Suddenly, his radar beeped, flashing 72 miles per hour. The speed limit here was 55. "Here we go," Smith muttered, setting the coffee cup into the holder and turning on his lights. He sped after the SUV, his face lighting up with a mix of cool indifference and slight satisfaction. For him, this was the moment that made enduring a boring morning worthwhile. The SUV didn't immediately slow down, but Smith was confident. In his town, no one escaped the police. Finally, the vehicle pulled over. Smith braked hard and stepped out of his car, habitually adjusting his belt and hat. The SUV stood still, its engine quietly humming as if waiting for him. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a well-fitted dark blue suit. His calm demeanor and composed posture stood out, but Smith didn't notice. "Let's see who's so important," Smith muttered under his breath. Approaching the car, "License and registration," he demanded with practiced sternness, not even glancing at the man. The driver handed over his ID without a word. When Smith read the name, his hand trembled slightly. General Lewis Johnson. Smith couldn't believe it. Johnson was a decorated military hero, known for leading successful operations overseas and widely respected. But Smith's shock quickly morphed into anger and righteous certainty. "You know you broke the law," Smith said harshly, ignoring the rank on the ID. Johnson's calm voice replied, "Speeding. Yes, I accept responsibility." The general's composed response only fueled Smith's irritation. Snippets of thoughts raced through Smith's mind. Asterisk, why is he so calm? Does he think he's above the law? Asterisk. Smith had always distrusted people like Johnson, wealthy, influential, successful. To him, they seemed to live lives untouched by hardship, while he had faced struggles at every turn. "Put your hands on the car," Smith ordered sharply. Johnson paused, then complied without argument. Inside, Smith's anger boiled over. This was his moment to assert control, to prove that no one was above the law. Smith stepped closer, abruptly grabbing Johnson's wrist and twisting it behind his back. The general remained calm, his gaze unflinching. "What's this about?" Johnson asked, turning his head slightly to meet Smith's gaze. His calmness stirred something deeper in Smith, a mix of fear and anxiety he didn't want to acknowledge. "We're going to check if you've got anything illegal in the car," Smith snapped, despite having no grounds for suspicion. In his mind, this arrest was already complete, just another arrogant man relying on connections to protect him. But this time, Smith decided, no connections would help. Just as Smith pulled out the handcuffs, a police car from another department drove by. A second officer, Lieutenant Carlos Rodriguez, stepped out. Observing the scene, "Darren, what's going on?" Rodriguez called out. "Just detaining a violator." Smith grunted, avoiding eye contact. He continued pulling out the handcuffs. "Who's the violator?" Rodriguez stepped closer, his eyes widening when he recognized Johnson. "Darren, that's General Johnson." "So what?" Smith hissed, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. Something was wrong, but he refused to admit it. Rodriguez, however, saw the situation for what it was, a critical misstep. "You don't treat people like this lightly," Rodriguez said, stepping closer, "especially not based on bias. Johnson is a hero. Do you really think he's done something serious enough to warrant this?" Smith's heart raced. His inner voice screamed at him to stop, but pride and stubbornness wouldn't let him. "It doesn't matter who he is," Smith snapped. "No one is above the law." Rodriguez hesitated, searching for the right words. "Maybe this isn't what you think. Darren, let's just talk. Let him go, and we'll figure it out." Are you kidding me? Smith turned sharply toward Rodriguez, his voice filled with aggression. This guy clearly thinks he can do whatever he wants. Johnson finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. Officer, I did nothing wrong except speeding, and I accept that. But if you think you can intimidate me because I'm black, you're mistaken. Those words hit Smith hard. His eyes narrowed, anger flashing. You're not getting away with this. Smith hissed. Stop, Rodriguez said, his voice now firm with authority. You're making a huge mistake. Smith froze for a moment, then yanked his arm away from Rodriguez. What are you doing? He demanded. Rodriguez pulled out his phone and began recording. Evidence, he said coldly. If you continue, you're burying yourself. Suddenly, a car pulled up, and a journalist stepped out, camera in hand. The tension thickened. Smith grabbed Johnson by the shoulder, attempting to shove him onto the hood, but Johnson spun around with calm precision. This will be your last mistake, Johnson said, his voice steady. Not because I'm a general, but because I'm a citizen of this country. I won't allow you to violate my rights. Smith froze, his thoughts spiraling. A small crowd had gathered, phones out, recording everything. You've gone too far, Rodriguez said. Smith's anger boiled over, but the weight of the situation crushed him. He stepped back, loosening his grip on Johnson. Fine, he growled. You can go. Johnson adjusted his suit and stepped back. You're lucky I'm not filing a complaint. But remember, it's not because you're right. It's because someone had to show you how to act properly. Smith walked back to his patrol car, his face burning with humiliation. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his hands trembling. The consequences of his actions began to take shape in his mind. Johnson drove off, leaving behind a storm of emotions and disappointment. Rodriguez approached Smith's car. You went too far, Darren, he said quietly. If you hadn't stopped, this would have ended your career. Smith didn't respond. He stared ahead, knowing Rodriguez was right. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a career-ending misstep. The video of the incident spread like wildfire, drawing outrage and calls for accountability. Smith's superiors suspended him pending an investigation. The department launched a full review of his past cases, and Smith's life spiraled further out of control. General Johnson, meanwhile, used the incident to spark a broader conversation about systemic racism and police reform. In interviews, he spoke with calm conviction, emphasizing the need for change. For Smith, the fallout was unrelenting. He became the face of everything wrong with policing, a symbol of prejudice and abuse of power. As days turned into weeks, he realized there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. This was more than a confrontation, it was a reckoning. As the investigation into Smith's actions unfolded, the scrutiny became unbearable. Neighbors began to distance themselves, and whispers followed him wherever he went. Smith avoided going out whenever possible, retreating into the confines of his home. His once orderly life now felt like a chaotic storm. At the police station, the tension was palpable. Fellow officers who once joked and shared coffee with Smith now avoided him. The department's leadership knew they were under a spotlight, and their collective silence weighed heavily on him. Rodriguez, who had recorded the incident, tried reaching out. Darren, you need to think about your next steps, he said one evening. This isn't just about your job anymore. It's bigger than that. Smith didn't respond. The weight of his mistakes crushed any attempt at meaningful conversation. He could barely face himself, let alone those who tried to help. Meanwhile, Johnson's presence in the media grew stronger. His interviews and speeches weren't just about his experience but about the larger issues of racial bias and abuse of power. He became a voice for change, and his calm demeanor resonated with audiences across the country. In one particularly impactful interview, Johnson said, "This isn't just about one officer or one incident. It's about a culture that allows such behavior to go unchecked. If we want a better future, we need to confront these issues head-on." Hearing those words, Smith felt a pang of regret. He replayed the events of that day in his mind, questioning every decision he had made. He wondered if things could have gone differently if he had just paused, listened, or acted with restraint. One morning, A letter arrived at Smith's doorstep. It was from Johnson. Trembling, Smith opened it. The letter was brief but powerful. Asterisk Officer Smith, I've seen many moments of confrontation in my life, but I believe in redemption and growth. This isn't the end of your story. It's a chance to reflect and change. Use it wisely. L. Johnson asterisk. Smith stared at the letter for a long time. It wasn't absolution, but it was an opportunity to take accountability and rebuild. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Change wouldn't come easily, but perhaps it wasn't too late to start.